Okay, I'm aware you all up late last night. I'm not going to do anything technical in this talk. I just wanted to discuss some issues, bring up things which affect me in the work I do from day to day, which is decision modelling and process modelling in real decision automation projects for FICO. FICO has really bought into DMN in a big way. I'm not going to plug our products today, but just to let you know that DMN is going to form the core of our new decision management suite. It will actually create your entire solution, starting with the decision model and then building out through all the components of that model into the underlying components. So it's very important to us. I want to talk about the relationship between business process modeling and decision modeling, because that's something that is very interesting and exercises me on a day-to-day basis. And I've sort of raised some issues, not necessarily making any conclusions, but just inviting you to come back with some ideas. So I want to talk about the two separate domains of process modeling and decision modeling, because they are quite different worlds. This is the background to that verse from Kipling there is a piece of art by Kamala Kim, where she's methodically stitched out all of those words obscuring the text. I'll come back to that later. So let's look at these two domains and think about how different they are. Business processes extend over time. And what we're really modelling when we model a business process using BPMN is a period of time, the things that happen in it. Decisions, at least as we tend to model in DMN, are thought of as instantaneous. And those of you working in detailed rule technical things may be measuring the duration of decisions in microseconds, but from the modelling point of view, a decision happens at a point in time. So business processes are modelled as sequences of activities, sequence flows between activities. The major connector in a BPMN diagram says this occurs after that. Whereas decisions are modelled as requirements between the elements in DMN, which are decisions, data and knowledge. So the most important connector in a DMN diagram, DRD, is an information requirement, or a data flow, if you like. Business processes are used to manage states and events which are significant to the business. Whereas decisions, at least as we tend to do them nowadays, are implemented as stateless services. So within the domain being modelled by our DMN, there really is no such thing as a state, except the current state. Decisions in DMN have no side effects, at least ideally. The idea is you present your service with a set of data, you get a set of results back, and that's it. In a very real sense, you could say that a business process is nothing but side effects. You've got, you're orchestrating a process, but the business process model doesn't really describe it. The interest is what the process is causing to occur outside of it. And just a final note, business processes change slowly and rarely, partly because of the hideous effort involved in changing them, but they don't tend to, a BPMN model will stay stable over years, whereas decision models can change rapidly and often. Certainly the contents of them can change on a daily basis, or even hourly in some contracts. So where are the meeting points between these two domains, as different as now? Because we want to implement a project using both DMN and BPMN, we have to see how they touch each other. Well, a process model, what it models is a single case, a single instance of traversing a process, or all the possible parts that a single case might take through a process, but it's still a case that we're dealing with. A decision model also models a single case, an instance of decision making. And if we're using both of these models in a single project, we are modelling the same case. We're modelling an instance of decision making of a case which is passing through a process. And it's the same case. Process model can include decision making as one type of activity. And the decision model can define the decision making which is taking place in that activity. Very obvious. Process model also has activities in it which gather data, which can be used for decision making. So in the decision model, we can model the data which are gathered by the process. The decision model then provides results, which are then used in the process. So you already see the points of contact between these models. Similarly, if we're working on an event basis, we can trigger decision making on an event, which is modeled in the process, and we can use the data describing the event to determine our best response. We can generate process events in return. So those are the sorts of relationships between the two models that we need to formalise and exploit when we're modelling in the two domains. Perhaps I should say three domains. We've got decisions, events, and processes. DMN models our decision making. BPMN models both processes and events and the relationships between them. We have a fairly clear way of mapping processes to decisions. I'm not so clear about the relationship between events and decisions. This used to be the field that's covered by CDP, which is a buzzword you don't hear much nowadays. And I think that's something which will come to the fore a lot more as we move into decisioning on complex streams of data. But the chief mapping we'll look at today is between processes and decisions. That's a little bit of artwork I showed you later was actually a performance piece. There were two people doing the stitching. They passed the needle backwards and forwards through the paper, demonstrating that east and west are in fact connected, and using the stitching to deny the flow, which is rather nice. I'm going to show you how we can stitch together BPMN. I'm going to take one simple example, which is a real case that I've been working on recently. I say simple, it's not a simple project. This is a project for healthcare claims management. Very complex field, where you want to decide, you want to take a claim for a claim on a healthcare policy. You want to decide, is this claim justified? Is this person covered by a policy? Is the treatment justified for the symptoms they have? How much should we pay for these treatments? Are the people who carried out the treatments allowed to do so, and so on? They're a very complicated field. And a solution involves literally thousands of rules and hundreds of thousands of rows of reference data. So we used decision requirements analysis as the methodology. So we started with the decision modelling as the fundamental backbone to the requirements analysis. We started with business processes. So we find here we've got the three business processes we looked at. And in those processes, I'm not going to go into the details, this is customer stuff anyway, but we found 7 decision points where there was significant decision making going on that we could automate. And we realised they could be satisfied by 3 decision services that would be used in different combinations in the 3 processes. So then we can move on to modelling the decision making in those services. So we model each service as a DRD. Here's the DRD for the first service. We identify all of the data which are required by the decisions to be made, and we map that to the process. We found where in the process all those data would be connected. So here we have, there are essentially 3 levels of decision making. A claim for healthcare treatment when it comes in, there is an object at the claim level, That claim consists of a number of treatment events, and each of those events is described by a number of charge lines, and that is basically the structure of data you have to process. So we're making decisions on all those levels. We're looking at whether those things are valid, whether they're eligible, and we're looking at the routing of the case and the sorts of intervention we need to apply to it. So that's the basic structure of the decision making. We also noted that the decisions in some services depended on decisions in previous services. We have those specifically in that sort of mind. We then took that down a level, and we looked at all the business knowledge and the knowledge sources required. So what areas of rules were there for making each of these decisions? So I've taken here, this is just the left-hand column of decisions there, showing you the sort of detail that's behind it. We've got these various areas of rules which come from different areas of business knowledge. So for example, there are legislative, there are acts which the rules have to be compliant with. So there are sets of rules, sets of legal rules which have to be configured to implement the requirements of the Act. Similarly, there are different sets of rules governed by different sets of knowledge or documents. This means that some of those knowledge models we noticed were reused, and some of the knowledge sources were in common too. But the most important part of this analysis was that that was then the basis for scoping and estimating the cost of the project. Vastly important because most of the effort involved in a significant decision-making project is actually in the collection, the formalization, and the configuration of these rules. So that's where most of the effort is. There's integration, getting the data into the system and the results out. There's some rule service development effort in setting up the structure of the decision making, but most of the effort lies in those business knowledge models, which is why I was talking yesterday about the importance of these things in terms of modeling. That this is where you draw out the things which are important to the project. What we were able to do, having identified all of those areas of required knowledge, was get the customer's experts to estimate the number of rules and their complexity in each of those areas, and we were able to come to a fairly accurate estimate of the costs of implementation.
This coding reference data is for traceability between knowledge source and implementation.
Now this is in the healthcare field. There's a lot of standardization across the industry. So, for example, a particular operation will have a standard code attached to it, and the organisation says that for that code you're allowed to pay this amount, you're allowed to use this type of person, and this hospital is allowed to do that operation, but other hospitals aren't, and so on. So there's a huge amount of reference data which is stored in databases in the form of codes. And obviously it would make no sense to reformulate all that in the form of rules. The rules access the data structure. This then moves up to the show you the overall relationship between the decision services that's resulted. So we have these three services. They're each making decisions on these three levels of line, event, and claim, and there are dependencies between them, as you see. So that completes our decision model. All of this was taken down to the sort of level you saw on the previous slide. So finally, we have our business process model and our decision model, and we have a mapping between them. So each decision point in the process is an activity which is directly mapped to one of these services. It is a call to the service. All the implementations that have been provided in that call are collected in particular named activities on the process. All the results returned by the services are used in particular activities of the process. And we have the dependencies between the services. So we have a complete mapping through the project. So that shows you how, in principle, we use BPMN and DMN together in drawing out the requirements and structure of the machine for the project. So what's the problem? The problem is that there's a space between BPMN and DMN that you can think of as contested. So that's really what I want to talk about. This is the example at the end of the DMN spec, which is a very simple sketch of the originations process. So we collect application data from a customer. We have the first decision point there, which decides on our strategy. Should we decline them outright? Should we go to the bureau? Or should we carry on? We then have a second decision point where we decide on our affordability and so on, our possible offers. And then route the case possibly through a human review. And the application is eventually accepted or declined. In this formulation of the solution in the spec, there's no overlap between the BPMN and DMN. All the decisioning takes place in those two yellow activities, and BPMN handles everything else. Bruce took me to task over this in his latest book, DMN Method and Style. What Bruce says is that this process is implementing an end-to-end decision. There's one entry point, there's like two exit points. Okay, so you can say that this process is making a decision whether to accept or decline the case. And that decision is not represented in our decision model. All these two services only model what's going on in these two places. It doesn't model the overall decision being made. So Bruce says, we'll model that, we'll call that decision approval. There it is. That decision depends on three things. It depends on what's decided at that first gateway, what's decided at the second gateway, and what's decided by the human reviewer here. So we have those three requirements here: strategy, routing, and the adjudication by the human case officer, and our approval decision. And Bruce then shows you can draw up a decision table to show exactly what decision making is here. And actually that helps you show rather more clearly BPMN all the possible tricky cases that might go through the process and how that happens. You'll notice that in this approach, the approval logic is actually defined twice. It's defined in the process as the logic of the gateways, and it's defined in our decision table on the approval decision, which is interesting. It means you can cross-validate, for example. I actually share a lot of these concerns. It is true that process does implement a decision which is not modelled in the DMN decision models. And it's true that there's overlap between what can be modelled in DMN and what you can model in BPMN. And it's also true that how you deal with that is a matter of method and style. Okay? So, this is not an insignificant concern. It seems a little trivial with that example out of the spec because it's a very simple process. But the real process, the logic in the process model can be very complex. So the overlap could be considerable. What about an alternative approach? Not an alternative approach. What about trying to reduce this problem by trying to remove the complexity from the BPMN? Can we simplify the process to minimize the overlap? Here's, this is another real project. This is a payday loan company who wanted a very fast credit approval system. And rather than as in the previous model, where you just go to one bureau or not, they use a lot of services to gather information about their applicants. So they have several credit rating agencies, they have several affordability services, and they have several validation services. All these services cost money, so they don't want to use them unless they have to. So what we did is we have a three-stage process. We look at the data we have and we say, can we, given what we know, decide whether to accept or decline this case? And if we can't, then what extra data do we need? So we might go to one of these services and then we try again. And we keep doing that, gathering data as we go until we can make a decision to decline or accept or continue. And then we look at affordability and so on. So the services there are implementing the logic which might be otherwise in the business process model, the logic about how to go to these various services and what order to use them. So what we've done is basically the DMN has eaten the BPMN to a certain extent.
Still question here. So you said that you have some rules that define or logic that when you want to go for credit decisions 1, 2, 3,
yes.
If you satisfy this first decision, you're not going to next 2.
That's
this
right.
Is kind of business logic what in implemented where in business process is this choice not, or it's inside?
It's all in the decision service. The decision service looks at the data and says, can I make a decision? If not, what data should I go and get? And then the only logic in here is routing the case to the activity specified by the decision. Okay. And then on the other, there's logic in here for actually calling the service, obviously. But the DMN decision model is deciding what action to take with regard to collecting data. And it's re-entry, so each time it gets presented with the case, it's making a stateless decision based on the data it's got at that time.
So you agree with Bruce that this decision node should be moved inside DMN, which services to call, or you don't agree with him? Could be.
I'm not sure Bruce is saying that, but anyway, I'm just discussing this as one way of handling, one way of handling the modeling. Okay.
Yeah,
I think
it's natural to move based on what you said inside the DMN. Because there is no human involved, it's an automated decision.
Yeah.
So it becomes closer and closer to end.
Absolutely, yes.
Well,
Yes.
what about data updates though?
Yeah.
Because the process usually does a lot of data updates.
Yeah. If you want to, you have to be very careful about, in this process, the data which are collected don't change. This takes place quite quickly. So the application data aren't going to be collected again, they're constant. And we're just collecting these probably don't be updated or not today anyway. So this is not...
It's just a lazy fetch of the data
Yeah.
required.
Yeah.
It seems to me like the difference between this and the Chapter 11 is, well, except for that NCO, which I'm not sure what that is. I mean, this is kind of this stateless thing, whereas the Chapter 11 was a stateful thing.
Yeah.
And what was interesting to me about Chapter 11 was that the DRD can describe what I would call a stateful decision. You said decision is stateless, but actually DRD, if you view the approval of the loan as a decision, okay,
Yes.
that doesn't occur in one instance. It's like, we do this, do we need to then go out to get the credit report? You know, based on that, do we need to get an adjudicator involved?
And that
So
is-
it actually takes time.
You're absolutely right. And that's exactly the basis on which I adopted the other approach of only modeling the decision making at particular points. But you're absolutely right, it can be done. Yeah. You can go further than that. Here's another model for the bank behind a large furniture retailer which has operations in most of the countries of Europe. And they came to us saying that we've got a different origination system in each of our European countries. Can you give us a generic solution which covers them all? Unfortunately, all of their processes were very different across these different countries. So I produced this generic process model where the differences between the countries could be seen as different sequences of actions through these various loops. So again, we have a central evaluate case decision point, and we might go and collect some more data about the case through this loop. We might go back to the customer and get more data or documents through that loop. We might send it for review, get some judgments by the case officer, reevaluate it, and so on. And eventually, we offer them a contract, or we don't. We originate or we decline. So the decision logic in that process has been pretty well minimized, except for the fact that we've still got the decision by the case officer there. So you could say the overall end-to-end decision is saying we decline if either the rule service or the adjudicator says decline. This is the logical endpoint, I suppose, where we have a decision point at the top there, which decides exactly all these things that we're going to do. It can get data from various places, it can go back to the customer, it can collect documents, it can send a case to review, it can make offers, check whether the contract's been signed, and so on. And eventually, it decides whether to decline or originate. There is no logic, there is no decision logic in that process at all, except what's in the decision logic. Now, I have serious issues with this, or at least customers do. In fact, I had those problems in the previous model. I produced the generic model as I was asked to by the client, but particular countries were not happy with this. They wanted to see their processes as they understood them as sequences of events. What I had to do was map out sort of virtual processes which were instantiations of this for the particular processes which they like to follow in their countries as determined by the rules in the decision service.
So I wonder what this says about seen and in. Because, you know, seen and in looks a lot like your previous slide, right?
Exactly.
The bag of activities.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
But of course,
can you model evaluate case in DMN? It just seems so open-ended that.
Yes, yes.
And DMN is very sort of, you've got to enumerate all the inputs, and this looks like the inputs are all so dependent on what you collect.
Yes, you have all those, these all generate input data elements, essentially. And you're making decisions, you're making two sorts of decisions in here. You're making decisions about the case you actually want to make, like, can we make them an offer, and also what is it? But you're also making decisions about whether the data you've got are adequate and what will we need, and what other actions. So you essentially, you're representing your process requirements in your decision logic. And it's hard, you know, the rules are not good for representing sequences and things. So a process model is designed to represent sequences and rules aren't. You end up doing something like a state machine, which is fine and efficient if your mind works like that, but customers are not good at looking at a set of state transition rules and understanding what that means in terms of what's actually going to happen in the process. In fact, if you take it to logical conclusion, what you could do is use your rules to emulate the BPMN. And in fact, we did that once in the Middle East. We produced a decision service where the rules maintenance interface was actually a BPMN diagram editor. So you create your business process flow, and that would be compiled into a set of rules which were then executed. I think this is a very strange world to be living in, where you use one modelling environment to try to model something that's better modelled in another modelling environment.
But Alan, for some of those use cases, you really need some sort of goal-directed reasoning, don't you? I mean, we've done a use case where someone wants to fill out a tax return, and you want to ask the minimum number of questions required to complete the tax return.
Yeah.
And that's, with just a forward-chaining engine, that's extremely difficult to do.
It is indeed, you're right. Especially where you want to try to provide an efficient and friendly experience for the customer. You don't want to keep going back to them with random questions, like the Expert Systems did.
Mm-hmm.
You want both only collect the data you want, and you want to organise that in a sensible sequence of steps that makes sense to somebody filling in a few pages. It's very hard to do both.
Yeah, and I don't think neither models are very suited for that
No.
kind of problem, are they?
No, you're right.
This problem you're talking about was like a major topic at BPM Next this year.
Right.
And it's clearly where people want to go. There's a big need for this, but the problem is you cannot communicate to the stakeholders what's going on.
Yeah.
So it executes very nicely, but you can't communicate what it's doing
Exactly
very
right.
nicely
Yeah.
through a diagram.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how can I find a happy ending? Perhaps we should see this overlap as an opportunity for flexibility rather than as a problem. I think that's the conclusions here. First thing to note is that you will always have overlap between BPMN and GMN when decisions extend over time, and that's Bruce's point we made earlier. So if a process is seen as implementing an end-to-end decision, in other words, it is a decision-making process, or where you're making decisions about the sequence of things you want to happen. In either of those cases, you inevitably have decision-making that involves time and extends over time. And if that's the case, you've always got the opportunity of modelling it either in GMN or BPMN. So, our three basic options are to model the overlap in both models, cross-validate. You can try to minimise the overlap, as I've said, using re-entry decision services, so that you're basically breaking time down into instants where you make the same decision. Or, at the other extreme, you can see the process as containing a series of separate instantaneous decisions, and you can separate the models in that way. All of these are appropriate. Okay? The right model is the one which works as a means of communication between your customer and your development team. That's the important thing. And business analysis is about choosing the right model, building the right model to express what's required. I suppose that's my final point, really. Just to say that the approach we're adopting in DMS, in FICO, is to try to avoid the overlap. So we will be calling services specified in DMN from processes specified in BPMN, and not modeling the overlap. Okay, that's all.
How, a quick question,
Yeah.
I know this is about BPMN and PMN, but I think I heard somebody mention case management, but
Yeah.
could you share some thoughts about CMMN?
Yes,
How you
yes,
think that relates to statefulness, not statefulness?
It does, and I would like to address that as well, but to be honest, I don't understand CMMN as well as I do BPMN. But I think it's a very interesting field. Be interesting to see whether, for example, tasks that a user adds, or the tasks available to a user that they can do at any time could involve decision-making tasks which are automated, so the customer can submit something for decision or for validation, checking, or for calculation. You could put gateways on tasks which involve decision models to check whether the user is allowed to do this sort of thing. You could schedule things. There are all sorts of points of communication between GMN and CMMN, just as well between BPMN and BPMN. I think that is a very interesting field.
You just brought a very interesting issue that from real world case. you said that you actually need state machine. State machine, from my perspective, is a special type of decision data.
Yes.
And as a one author of DMN, why we don't have this type as a special DKM, or why we don't have it in DMN?
That's a very interesting idea. Yeah. Yes, something we could consider. Yeah.
We do have its implementation in open rules,
Right.
as a special decision data. So, and it's very powerful and it really helps resolve the problems that you have. So you don't need business process to implement this. It will be very well defined in the scope of DMN.
Is there some sort of graphical representation of it?
Always we do this in normal, like, regular
graph.
table, it's just events, columns, and
Or is it table?
actions in
I see.
what we call rules.
But it could be drawn out as an STD, I suppose.
It can be.
How would it be different? Because you can do it in game. You don't have the name, but you can do a statement.
It's different logic because it's not rules anymore. Columns are events and rows are reactions to certain events. But it's state transformation rules. So you still can call them rules. So
It's a particular configuration of decision table, isn't it?
yes.
If, like in your first example, I think you duplicate some of the logic, part of it is in DMN, and it's also in the process for like different steps. Then of course you might have possible inconsistencies between
Yes.
what you do in one and in the other. So there is some room for validation or checking or.
Indeed. Indeed.
I really like your presentation, but I don't see BPMN and DMN as overlapping. I mean, I see them as dealing with different domains of logic. DMN deals with decision logic, which is in the data domain, and BPMN deals with process logic, which is in the action domain. And they can talk about the same thing, but they're talking about it differently. So I don't really see it as like they're competing to define it. They just, one's talking about the sequence of steps to execute it. The other says, here's the logic in some declarative way, and it really, the logic can change based on the order that you execute. In theory, right. I mean,
Yes.
I think
that's the separation I prefer as well.
I think that stands up. It gets a lot more interesting when you throw events into the mix,
Yeah.
and you're looking for interesting patterns over event
That's
streams.
definitely
Because then you're really in this kind of slightly messy hybrid world where things are stateful,
I agree with that.
which is what I'll talk about.
We still have 5 more minutes. Can I bring some controversial conclusion from your presentation? It sounds like it's not just overlapping, but the man more aggressively moving to BPM territory, more and more. And if I take your schema and I can see that what BPM does, it removes decision points from BPM process, and as you said, BPM basically.
Well, BPM is at getting to the point where it says BPMN, those kinds of rigidly structured processes are running out of gas. We need something to do with the event world, with the more state machine type of world, and we need a language to deal with that. BPMN can't do it. CMMN is trying, but it's sort of failing to launch. And so maybe decision modeling can help them.
Absolutely, and I want to finish this extreme point. If we continue to move in this direction, then we can see the business process as a sequence of events or reaction to certain events. Logic of creating events is in the DMN territory. Then we just have regular message bus, and everybody subscribe or publish events, each DMN service, and the business process started to disappear because logic of calling different decision points is dynamic, And if you just have messaging, that's what left from BPM.
But Jacob, a lot of the stakeholders want to see that 2D diagram, right?
That's the trouble.
I had customer when we produced hundreds. It was 10 years ago. We produced hundreds of BPM schemas. And
Yeah, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but
they wanted to
it's a
see
fact.
this. After a while, they saw that they cannot maintain the schema. They don't understand what's going on. They decided to kill all schemas and left only one message bus with publish, subscribe services. And so they, instead of having 100 processes, they have one highly dynamic process. And this is everything moved to territory of business decisions, not to business process. Business process started to disappear. It doesn't disappear, but it's one huge dynamic complex process defined by events, not by, but all logic. Basically take DMN and remove ROMs. What will left from DMN?
I think it's a hard sell for some stakeholders.
But that's my conclusion from your presentation. That's all.
But why is it an either or? I don't think this is an either or. Right? I think the one thing that we need to realize as BPM practitioners is there's no such thing as a happy path in business processes.
Only unhappy paths.
Right?
Only unhappy paths.
Only unhappy path. There's no such thing as a happy path. I'm going to do it here and this is what happens. To your point, right? So you have to have this dynamic thing. Now, if somebody wants to see visually, what stops you to create, as those events go in and out, to go create a graph? It's just a cyclical graph that you just go create it anyway. So you have both then the visualization of what actually happens, right? And you create all sorts of templates, you can analyze them, you can do all sort of, value stream analysis on it, but then you effectively done the no happy path dynamic process through the messaging and eventing, right?
But we have generations of people that have seen the order to cash process, and they want to see that as a
They will
flow
see it
chart,
after it happens.
right?
As it happens.
Some of the requirements involve sequence. There are legislative requirements, but the fact that you've collected this permission to do something before you do it, for example. You can describe that in the form of rules, but is the business really going to be happy with that? They like to see it drawn out. But I think a lot of this is going to involve finding nice ways to translate between types of model. So take a set of rules, translate them into an STD or a BPMN diagram, and then so that you can work in whatever tool you want and still be able to communicate with the different stakeholders.
That's what we did in a number of research projects. You start from PMN, you start from rules, and you generate a process model to show it, but don't maintain the process model, maintain the source, and then generate a new process model.
Well, just take a slightly different tact on that, and have a look at decisions and processes being two unlike terms, but so I kind of use the idea of a dot product, like a vector, and the result is the dot product of the process and the rules, right? They're not the same, and the folks from the BPM side have tried to put all kinds of decision logic into process models historically, which have given a lot of organizations kind of a bad taste for what BPMN can actually deliver, because they haven't had a standard like BMN to be able to represent decision logic. But actually, taking into account what you're saying, Alan, in terms of looking at to Bruce's point, kind of the net decision, which is this dot product of the process, because think of how we do everything. There has to be some sequence in most things that we do.
Yes.
And it's not just that life operates on a message bus and you get information and everything just happens when you need it. There is some
especially when those messages are messages with a person.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
So all the human tasks,
conversation.
and then a decision, to me, in some cases, actually can be guidance to a human in terms of, let's say, a range of options and not a specific answer, where there's some value to the knowledge worker input into the ultimate result of the dot product of processing.
Well, I mean, it's not, just the event bus, to your point. I think event is just an implementation idea. What really completes the picture is the preconditions and post-conditions of a specific task, right? So the events, they so happen, and you have preconditions, post-conditions, which is exactly what describes what the users see, the way that you capture requirements, right? And I think that, again, that's how I would complete the picture. Events, that, JVM does that, and you have a nice way to implement it. It so happens. But again, I think the idea is, I'm going to say it again, there is no such thing as a happy path, and we've been mistaken to try to capture it as a happy path, because it's always an exception.
That, by the way.
What's that?
Just tweeted that.
There's no happy path in BPM,
Okay.
yes.
Let's stick to our schedule. We will have special presentation today from IBM, what brings together events and decision management. Then we'll
I'll
present
try.
decision management at the speed of events. And let's thank you, Alan.